My name is Lena Mercer. I was 32 years old, self-employed, and the daughter my family called whenever money went missing, paperwork became confusing, or something needed to be repaired before morning. But when I needed $4,200 to protect my ability to walk, my parents looked at me as if I had asked them to finance a vacation. I sat across from them with my injured leg locked inside a rigid brace and my surgeon's estimate resting on the table. The paperwork explained that I had 14 days to undergo surgery before the risk of permanent instability increased. I had even prepared a repayment schedule because I wasn't asking for a gift. My father barely examined it. "We just bought a boat," he said. "That money is already committed." The boat had cost approximately $37,000. My parents had placed $12,000 down on it. Yet the $4,200 required for my surgery was apparently beyond consideration. I turned to my mother, expecting her to recognize how serious the situation was. Instead, she folded her arms. "A limp will teach you responsibility." For a moment, I wondered whether the pain medication had distorted what I heard. My mother knew I had spent years solving financial problems for our family. She knew my emergency savings had been consumed by taxes, insurance, and repairs on the lake cottage everyone used, but no one helped me maintain. Yet she looked at the brace on my leg and treated a permanent disability like an appropriate punishment. My older sister, Brooke, gave a short laugh from across the room. "You'll manage," she said. "You always do." That laughter hurt more than the refusal. It told me this wasn't a misunderstanding. No one at that table believed my future mobility deserved to interfere with their comfort. Then the door opened, and my younger brother, Caleb, came inside carrying a worn envelope. He took one look at my face, placed the envelope in my hands, and said, "I sold all my tools. Here's $650. Caleb was a Finnish carpenter. Those tools weren't possessions he could replace whenever he wanted. They were how he paid rent, bought food, and kept his small business alive. My parents had protected a recreational boat. My brother had sacrificed his livelihood. I looked inside the envelope and counted the bills, even though my vision had started to blur. $650 wouldn't cover the surgical deposit, but no amount of money had ever told me more clearly who considered me family. Caleb believed he had given me everything he could. He didn't know what was coming. He didn't know that before this crisis was over, I would sell the one thing my parents and sister believed they could never lose. He also didn't know what I intended to do about the tools he had surrendered for me. Before I explain how my family reached that point, subscribe to the channel, turn on the notification bell, and like the video. If you have ever learned the painful difference between people who love you and people who only love what you provide, you are not alone here. To understand why I was willing to sell something that had once meant everything to me, we need to go back to the moment I learned exactly what my family's refusal might cost. A few days earlier, I was sitting in an orthopedic examination room with my injured leg elevated in front of me. The surgeon displayed the scans and pointed to the damage one piece at a time. I had a displaced ankle fracture, severe damage to the ligaments holding the joint together, and compression affecting the peroneal nerve. The medical terms blurred together until he explained what they meant. Without timely repair, my ankle could heal in the wrong position. The joint could remain unstable. The nerve damage could worsen. Even after treatment, recovery would require months of rehabilitation, but surgery within 14 days offered the strongest chance of preventing a pronounced permanent limp. 14 days. That was how long I had to protect something I had always assumed would remain mine, the simple ability to walk without thinking about every step. The injury had happened at the lake cottage my grandmother Evelyn left to me 2 years earlier. My parents were preparing to bring their newly purchased boat to the property, and my father had repeatedly postponed helping with the deteriorating dock. I finally attempted the repair myself because that was what I always did when my family left something unfinished. One compromised section gave way beneath me. My foot became trapped between two boards while the rest of my body twisted in the opposite direction. The sound from my ankle was sharp enough that I understood the damage before the pain fully arrived. By the time I reached the examination room, the injury had already stopped me from working normally. As a self-employed bookkeeper handling payroll for local tradespeople, I had no paid medical leave waiting for me. If I could not work, my income slowed immediately. Then, the surgical coordinator entered with the financial estimate. My high deductible insurance would cover most of the procedure, but the hospital required a $4,200 deposit before surgery could be scheduled. I stared at the figure on the page. $4,200 was not a fortune. Under normal circumstances, it was an amount I could have built toward. But there was nothing normal about receiving a 14-day deadline while losing income with every day that passed. The readily available portion of my savings had already gone toward cottage taxes, insurance, and essential repairs. Selling investments or arranging other financing would take time I did not have. Because I owned the cottage as a non-primary residence, immediate hospital charity assistance was unlikely to solve the problem. On paper, I owned valuable property. In reality, I could not convert it into surgical money overnight, or so I believed then. I drove home wearing the brace, placed the estimate beside my laptop, and reviewed every account twice. Then I did what I had spent my adult life avoiding. I admitted that I needed help. My parents had stable retirement income. They had access to savings and credit. Most importantly, they had just found $12,000 for the down payment on a boat they intended to keep at my dock without paying marina fees. I wasn't asking them to choose between my surgery and survival. I was asking them to choose between helping their daughter and protecting a luxury purchase. I prepared a repayment schedule, gathered the medical documents, and called my mother. At that moment, I still believed that once my parents understood the risk, they would help me. I had not yet learned that they understood perfectly. They simply believed I was the one who should pay the price. My mother agreed to meet the following evening, but her tone made it sound as though I had requested an appointment rather than help from my own parents. "Bring whatever the doctor gave you," she said. "Your father and I need to see the numbers." That should have reassured me. Numbers were safe territory for me. I had built my bookkeeping business around finding answers inside payroll reports, tax forms, and account ledgers. When one of my clients feared he had missed a quarterly payment, I could trace every transaction until I found the truth. When another couldn't understand why his labor costs had risen, I could show him exactly where the change began. Unfortunately, no spreadsheet could make $4,200 appear before my surgical deadline. I opened a new worksheet anyway. I entered the deposit, the estimated rehabilitation expenses, the income I could lose during recovery, and the maximum monthly payment I could make once I returned to work normally. I reduced my own food and transportation allowances until the proposal became almost punishing. Even then, I could repay my parents within 10 months. That was the kind of plan my mother claimed to respect. Diane Mercer believed every problem had a disciplined solution, especially when the person suffering was someone other than her. For most of my life, I had tried to earn her approval by becoming indispensable. When Brooke forgot an important payment, I fixed it before our parents learned about it. When my father struggled with retirement forms, he brought the stack to me. When my parents needed someone to compare insurance policies or challenge an incorrect bill, I handled it. They called me dependable. I had accepted that word as praise for years. Only after my injury did I understand that, in my family, dependable meant someone whose needs could always be postponed. The lake cottage had become the largest example of that pattern. My grandmother Evelyn owned it for decades. In her final years, I was the person who drove her to medical appointments, bought groceries, and kept the property from deteriorating. I never did those things to inherit anything. I did them because I loved her and because she had never made affection feel like a debt. When she died 2 years earlier, her will left the cottage solely to me. The deed was clear. The estate had been settled. Legally, no one else owned any part of it. Emotionally, My family behaved as if I were merely holding it for them. My mother stored seasonal decorations there. Brooke used it for summer weekends and treated the spare bedroom like her private suite. My father kept fishing equipment in the shed and discussed repairs as though he were supervising property that belonged to him. I paid the taxes, insurance, utilities, and maintenance. Caleb was the only person who helped without behaving as though his labor purchased a share. He repaired loose cabinet hinges and replaced damaged trim when he could, but he always asked before using the property. My parents never asked, they announced. 2 weeks before my injury, my father had called to tell me about the boat. He sounded happier than he had in months. "It's $37,000, but we got an excellent financing package," he said. "Only 12 down. We'll keep it at the cottage so we won't waste money on marina fees." There had been no question about whether he could use my dock. I reminded him that several boards and supports needed repair before the boat arrived. "I'll get to it," he said. He did not. As the planned delivery approached, I inspected the dock myself. One section had shifted enough to become dangerous, and I knew my father would blame me if his new boat could not be secured there. So I carried the repair materials down to the water and did what I had done for years. I tried to solve the problem before anyone else had to notice it. That decision put me in a brace. By the time I prepared to ask my parents for help, I had spent thousands preserving a property they enjoyed freely. My accessible savings had absorbed the latest insurance premium, property taxes, and essential repairs. If everyone had contributed fairly, I would have had enough for the surgery. But I had never required them to contribute because requiring anything from my family always created more conflict than simply paying. The evening before our meeting, I placed the repayment schedule, medical estimate, scan report, and insurance explanation into a folder. I checked every number repeatedly, then I looked at the cottage key on my desk. For years, that key represented my grandmother's trust. It also represented every holiday, summer evening, and family memory tied to the property. I still believed preserving those memories was part of preserving my family. The following evening would prove how differently my family viewed preservation. They wanted me to protect everything that benefited them. They simply did not consider my ability to walk one of those things. I arrived at my parents' house early because moving in the brace took longer than I expected. Every step required planning. I had to position the crutches, keep weight off the injured ankle, and control the sharp pressure that spread up my leg whenever it shifted inside the brace. My father watched me struggle through the doorway, but did not stand to help. Brooke was already there. She had positioned herself at the table with a drink in front of her, even though the conversation had nothing to do with her. That was normal in our family. Brooke attended difficult discussions as my mother's unofficial witness. Her presence guaranteed that whatever Diane decided would immediately be repeated as the family's shared opinion. I lowered myself into a chair and placed the folder on the table. "I brought everything," I said, "the diagnosis, the surgical estimate, and a repayment plan." My mother opened the folder first. She scanned the surgeon's report without asking how much pain I was experiencing. My father turned directly to the financial page. $4,200. He said. "That's the deposit. Insurance covers most of the procedure, but the hospital won't schedule it until the deposit is paid." "How soon do they expect this?" "Within 14 days of the diagnosis. I've already lost several of those days." My mother looked at my leg. "And their certain surgery is necessary?" I explained the displaced fracture, damaged ligaments, and nerve compression. I showed her the section stating that delayed repair increased the likelihood of permanent instability and a pronounced limp. "I'm not asking you to give me the money," I said. "I can repay $420 each month once I'm working normally again. If recovery takes longer than expected, I can begin with smaller payments and increase them later. Everything is written down." My father leaned back. "What happened to your savings?" The question embarrassed me, even though he already knew the answer. Property taxes, the insurance renewal, and repairs at the cottage used most of the available portion. My income has also slowed since the accident. You should have kept a larger reserve, my mother said. I had one. The cottage expenses reduced it. Brooke gave a small shrug. You chose to keep that place? I looked at her. You use it more than I do. That doesn't mean I'm responsible for your budget. I turned back to my parents before anger could pull the conversation away from the surgery. I know the timing is bad, but this is temporary. I have clients and reliable income. I just need enough to get the procedure scheduled. My father closed the folder. We just bought a boat. That money is already committed. The sentence sounded even colder than it had in the memory I would carry afterward. You put $12,000 down, I said carefully. I'm asking to borrow roughly a third of that. The boat was planned, he replied. Your accident wasn't. That's what emergencies are. They aren't planned. He looked toward my mother, silently transferring the discomfort to her. Diane straightened the pages in the folder. This is exactly why people need to think ahead, she said. You have always taken on too much and assumed you could handle it. I took on expenses for a cottage all of you use. No one forced you to do that. Her words left me momentarily speechless. Every time a roof repair, utility bill, or insurance premium came due, my family reminded me that the cottage was part of our shared history. But the moment those costs prevented me from paying for surgery, ownership became my private choice. I am thinking ahead, I said. That's why I'm asking before the damage becomes permanent. My mother slid the folder toward me. A limp will teach you responsibility. The room became unnaturally quiet. I studied her face, searching for some sign that she regretted the sentence immediately after saying it. There was none. My father looked down at the table. He knew it was cruel. That knowledge did not make him defend me. You think becoming disabled would be an appropriate lesson? I asked. Don't twist my words, my mother said. I'm saying consequences teach people to manage their lives better. I was injured repairing the dock your husband planned to use for his boat. My father's expression hardened. I never asked you to repair it that day. You told me the boat was arriving. That doesn't make this our fault. I looked from him to my mother. Neither one asked what would happen if surgery were delayed. Neither asked whether I could work, cook, shop, or safely move around my apartment. Their entire response focused on separating themselves from responsibility. Brooke broke the silence with a laugh. It was brief, almost casual. You'll manage, she said. You always do. That was the moment something inside me stopped defending them. Until then, I had told myself they were worried about money, confused by the medical language, or frightened by the sudden request. Brooke's laughter removed those excuses. They understood that I was afraid. They simply expected me to carry that fear alone. What exactly do you suggest I do? I asked. My mother tapped the folder. Review your options. I did. You own property. The meaning behind the statement was clear, although she did not believe I would act on it. To her, the cottage was simultaneously my private financial responsibility and untouchable family property. You want me to borrow against the cottage? I want you to behave like an adult and solve the problem without expecting your parents to rescue you. I collected the documents slowly. My hands had started trembling, and I did not want Brooke to see. My father could still have changed the direction of the conversation. He could have told my mother she had gone too far. He could have offered part of the deposit, helped me arrange credit, or delayed one boat payment. Instead, he asked, "Can you still make sure the dock is ready once your leg improves?" I stared at him. He had just refused to help protect my ability to walk, yet he was already thinking about when I could finish preparing my property for his boat. Before I could answer, the front door opened. Footsteps crossed the hallway, faster and heavier than my parents' careful silence. Caleb appeared in the doorway with his work jacket still on and a worn envelope gripped in one hand. He looked at the brace, then at the folder in my lap. "What happened?" he asked. For the first time that evening, someone's concern was directed at me instead of the money. I had sent Caleb a short message earlier that day telling him about the surgery. I had not asked him for money because I knew his business was still fragile. Finnish carpentry required specialized equipment, reliable transportation, and a steady flow of contracts. Caleb had the skill, but he was still rebuilding his reputation after several inconsistent years. My parents interpreted every slow month as proof that he lacked discipline. I knew better. Caleb had worked hard to register his business properly, track his expenses, and build relationships with contractors. I had helped him organize the bookkeeping, but the work itself belonged entirely to him. He entered the room and moved closer to me. "Why didn't you tell me it was this bad?" "I told you surgery was possible." "You didn't say you could lose normal use of your leg." My mother exhaled impatiently. No one said she was losing her leg. "The surgeon said delayed treatment could leave permanent damage," I replied. Caleb looked toward our parents. "Then help her." My father crossed his arms. "It isn't that simple." "It sounds simple. We just made a major purchase." Caleb's eyes moved toward the window, where promotional material for the boat was still sitting near my father's chair. "The boat?" "It's already financed," Martin said. Caleb stared at him for several seconds. Then he placed the envelope in my hands. "I sold all my tools," he said. "Here's $650. I felt the weight of the bills through the paper. At first, I thought I had misunderstood. "What do you mean, all your tools?" "The ones I could sell, the saws, nailers, router, sanders, everything from the trailer." My chest tightened. "Caleb, those are how you work. I can replace them later. With what money?" "I'll figure something out." My father shook his head. "That was impulsive. You probably sold several $1,000s worth of equipment for almost nothing." Caleb turned toward him. "At least I sold something." The words landed harder than shouting would have. My mother's mouth tightened. "We are not going to be shamed because Caleb made another irresponsible financial decision." "He made it because I need surgery," I said. "And now neither of you has stability," she replied. "That proves my point." Caleb ignored her and crouched beside my chair. "I know it isn't enough," he said quietly, "but it can get you closer." My first instinct was to return the envelope. Caleb needed those tools more than I needed $650 that could not secure the procedure by itself. Then I recognized what refusing would mean to him. He had arrived believing that if everyone gave what they could, we might solve the problem together. He did not yet realize that he was the only person in the room willing to lose anything. I closed my fingers around the envelope. "Where did you sell them?" "A used equipment dealer outside town." "Did he give you a receipt?" Caleb frowned. "Why?" "I want to know exactly what you gave up." He reached into his jacket and handed me a folded sales slip. The listed equipment filled most of the page. Even without calculating the full replacement value, I knew $650 represented a fraction of what those tools were worth. I folded the receipt and placed it inside my medical folder. "Thank you," I said. He looked relieved, but I could not share that relief. The envelope contained hope, love, and evidence of a terrible imbalance. My financially stable parents had protected their leisure. My brother, whom they labeled irresponsible, had destroyed his ability to earn income because he could not tolerate watching me face the crisis alone. I looked at my mother. She seemed more offended by Caleb's sacrifice than moved by it. Brooke had stopped laughing, but she did not apologize. My father stared at the table. Something became clear to me then. If I accepted Caleb's $650, allowed him to remain without tools, and preserved the cottage for the people who had refused me, I would be repeating the same cruelty in a different form. I would be protecting the comfort of people who offered nothing by consuming the future of the one person who offered everything. I put the folder into my bag and pushed myself upright. My father finally stood. "Where are you going?" "Home." "We haven't resolved anything," my mother said. "Yes, we have." Caleb helped steady me while I positioned the crutches. My mother followed us toward the hallway. "Lena, do not make an emotional decision because you're upset." I stopped at the door. For years, that warning would have frightened me. I had been trained to distrust any decision my family disliked by calling it emotional. But the most emotional decision in that house had already been made. My parents had chosen a boat because it represented comfort and status. Then they had disguised that choice as financial discipline. "I'm going to review my options," I said, repeating her words. Caleb drove me home. During the trip, he discussed borrowing equipment and taking smaller jobs until he could rebuild. He spoke as though losing his tools were a temporary inconvenience. I listened without telling him what had begun forming in my mind. When I entered my apartment, the cottage key was still on my desk. I placed Caleb's $650 and the equipment receipt beside it. For the first time since Evelyn's death, I looked at the key without seeing only family memories. I saw an asset. I saw an obligation. And I saw the one thing large enough to save my leg without requiring Caleb to destroy his future. I did not sleep much that night. Pain woke me whenever I shifted, but the larger problem was the question waiting on my desk. Could I sell the cottage? Legally, the answer was simple. Emotionally, it felt like deciding whether to cut away the last physical connection I had to my grandmother. Evelyn never spoke to me about the property as though it were a prize. During her final years, she told me only that she wanted me to protect it until I understood what future genuinely served me. At the time, I assumed protecting it meant keeping it forever. But my grandmother had also been the only person in my family who noticed when responsibility became exploitation. She thanked me when I helped her. She worried about the fuel I used driving to appointments. When I repaired something, she asked what it cost and tried to repay me. My parents did none of those things. After Evelyn died, my mother was furious that the cottage had passed directly to me. She never challenged the estate successfully because there was nothing unclear about it, but her resentment appeared in smaller ways. She referred to it as our lake place. She invited guests without asking. She expected me to schedule repairs around Brooke's preferred weekends. I kept accepting the behavior because the cottage held family history, and I feared that enforcing ownership would make me appear greedy. Now that same fear could cost me my mobility. 4 months before my injury, a local realtor had contacted me on behalf of the owners of an adjoining property. They had made a cash offer of approximately $238,000. I had allowed the preliminary inspection and title review because I wanted to understand my options, but I rejected the offer. I told the realtor I was not emotionally ready. The buyers asked to be contacted if I reconsidered. At sunrise, I opened the old email. The offer, inspection report, and title documents were still in the folder. Because the property was mortgage-free and the buyers did not require financing, the transaction had always been capable of moving faster than an ordinary sale. That mattered now. I called the realtor as soon as the office opened. "I need to know whether the adjacent owners are still interested," I said. There was a brief silence. "You're ready to sell?" "I'm ready to discuss it. I have a medical deadline." She asked whether anything significant about the property had changed since the inspection. I told her about the damaged section of the dock and my injury, making sure nothing was concealed. "The buyers already planned to address the waterfront structures," she said. "I'll confirm whether their offer remains active." Waiting for her return call felt longer than the entire night. I reviewed alternatives again. A property-backed loan would require an application, valuation, underwriting, and time. High-interest medical financing could place my business and apartment at risk while I was unable to work fully. Selling investments quickly would not produce enough. The cottage was the only resource capable of covering surgery, rehabilitation, lost income, and long-term stability. The realtor called back before noon. The buyers remained interested. They would honor the approximate $238,000 price, subject to confirmation that the title remained clear and the condition had not materially changed beyond what I disclosed. Their previous inspection and cash position made a rapid closing realistic. "How rapid?" I asked. if everyone cooperates within the medical window you described. My heart began pounding. The possibility should have created relief. Instead, grief arrived first. I pictured Evelyn on the porch with a blanket over her knees. I remembered summer evenings when the lake reflected the sky so perfectly that the horizon disappeared. I remembered carrying groceries into the kitchen while she insisted I sit and eat before doing any work. Then I remembered lying beside the damaged dock, staring at the boat materials my father had expected me to prepare. The cottage had once been a place where I felt loved. After Evelyn's death, it became the place where my family's entitlement was most visible. Selling it would not erase my grandmother. Keeping it would not restore her. I asked the realtor to send the updated paperwork. When the documents arrived, I did not sign immediately. I reviewed every clause, verified the buyer information, and contacted the title office directly. I was not making an impulsive decision. I was doing what I had always done, examining the facts until the responsible choice became clear. The difference was that this time, responsibility included me. That afternoon, my mother sent a message. "Have you found a sensible solution?" I looked at the cottage key beside Caleb's equipment receipt. Then I answered, "I'm working on one." Before accepting the offer, I calculated what the sale would actually provide. The approximate price was $238,000. After closing costs, fees, and a conservative tax reserve, I expected to retain approximately $213,000. That amount would cover the $4,200 surgical deposit, rehabilitation expenses, transportation, lost income, and a genuine medical reserve. It could also remove me from the cycle that had kept me vulnerable. I would no longer be paying taxes, insurance, utilities, and repairs on a property my relatives enjoyed as though it belonged to them. I could eventually buy a modest single-level home more suitable for recovery. I could protect my business without wondering which family expense would consume my savings next. Financially, the decision was obvious. Emotionally, I still felt as if I were betraying someone. I placed Evelyn's key in my palm and asked myself one question. If my grandmother were alive, would she want me to preserve the cottage for relatives who considered my permanent limp an acceptable lesson? The answer came without drama. No. Evelyn had left the property to me because she trusted my judgment. Refusing to use it when I genuinely needed it would not honor that trust. It would turn her gift into another instrument of control. I signed the acceptance. The realtor confirmed receipt and began coordinating the accelerated closing. Because the buyers had already inspected the property, the title was clear, and no mortgage required discharge, the process could move within the necessary time frame. Once the agreement became binding, I sat quietly for several minutes. I expected regret to crush me. Instead, beneath the grief, I felt something unfamiliar: space. For the first time, I had made a major decision without first calculating how to protect my family from its consequences. I paid nothing toward the boat. I asked no one's permission. I did not soften the sale into a temporary threat designed to force an apology. I simply acted. The next responsibility was notifying my family. Several personal items still remained at the cottage. My parents had fishing equipment and seasonal boxes there. Brooke had clothing in the spare room. They deserved a reasonable opportunity to collect those things, even if they had shown me no comparable consideration. I wrote one clear message to the family group. The Alder Lake cottage is under a binding cash sale. Closing is being expedited. Please remove all personal belongings by the deadline listed below. I am the sole owner, and the transaction does not require additional approval. Coordinate access threw me in writing. I read the message twice and added nothing emotional, no accusation, no mention of the boat, no reminder about my surgery. Then I sent it. My mother called in less than a minute. I let the first call ring out. My father called immediately afterward. Brooke began sending messages. What sale? You can't be serious. Mom says you're selling Grandma's cottage. Call us now. The wording revealed what they believed. It was Grandma's cottage when they wanted control. My property when expenses became inconvenient. and the family cottage whenever they wanted access. My mother called again. This time I answered. "What have you done?" she demanded. "I accepted a cash offer. You cannot sell that property." "I already have. You had no right to make that decision without this family." "The deed says otherwise. That cottage is part of our history. So is what happened at your table." She inhaled sharply. "You are selling a $238,000 property because we would not hand you $4,200. No, I'm selling it because my medical emergency showed me what keeping it actually costs." "You're upset. Cancel the agreement before you do permanent damage." Permanent damage. She could use those words for a property transaction, but not for my leg. "The agreement is binding," I said. My father's voice appeared in the background, asking about the boat. A moment later, he took the phone. "Lena, where am I supposed to keep it?" That was his first question. Not when my surgery would occur, not whether the sale would cover treatment. Where would he keep his boat? "I suggest you contact a marina." "Do you know what seasonal slips cost?" "No." "But you knew the cottage was legally mine before you bought it. You gave us every reason to believe we could use the dock. I gave you permission. I did not give you ownership. This is vindictive. I am selling my property to pay for surgery and secure my recovery. With that sale price, you'll have far more than you need. Then I will finally have the reserve you said I should have built." He had no response. My mother took the phone again. "This family will never look at you the same way." I glanced at the brace around my leg. "I already know." Then I ended the call. The cottage was sold. My family's access was ending. And for the first time, their anger could not change the decision. The pressure began immediately. My mother sent long messages about Evelyn's wishes, even though she had spent years resenting the decision Evelyn documented in her will. My father forwarded marina prices as though they were invoices I had created. Brooke accused me of destroying future holidays and punishing everyone over one disagreement. Not one of them asked when surgery was scheduled. They spoke about bedrooms, storage boxes, the dock, and the boat. They calculated what the sale would remove from their lives without acknowledging what their refusal had risked removing from mine. Brooke called the following morning. "You need to calm down and think beyond yourself," she said. I nearly laughed at the contradiction. "I am thinking about my health. You could borrow against the cottage. The process may not finish before the surgical window closes. Then get another medical opinion. I already have the diagnosis. You know Mom says things when she's frustrated. She said a permanent limp would teach me responsibility. She didn't mean it literally. She refused the money literally." Brooke became quiet. I continued. "You were there. You laughed. I was uncomfortable. You laughed because you expected me to manage the way I always manage every problem that inconveniences this family. That isn't fair. Neither is using a property for free and then telling the owner that its expenses prove she is irresponsible." Her voice hardened. "You have always acted superior because Grandma chose you. I never mentioned the inheritance unless someone ignored my ownership. You didn't deserve the entire cottage." There it was, not concern for family history, not grief over Evelyn, resentment. "Thank you for finally being honest," I said. I ended the call before she could reshape the statement. My father's strategy was different. He tried to make the sale sound financially irrational. He sent calculations for potential property appreciation and argued that selling quickly might sacrifice future value. In isolation, some of his points were reasonable, but he ignored the immediate cost of delay, the carrying expenses I had paid alone, and the fact that my body was not an investment account capable of waiting for a better market. I replied once. The offer was supported by the earlier inspection and market review. "The price is acceptable. My decision is final," he answered. "This is not how family treats family." I stared at the message for a long time. Then I placed Caleb's equipment receipt beside my phone and photographed it, not to send, but to remind myself what family had looked like when it entered that room. Family looked like a younger brother selling the tools that fed him. It did not look like a father protecting a boat and complaining about marina fees. Diane's pressure was more personal. She reminded me of childhood expenses, school supplies, birthday celebrations, and every ordinary parental responsibility, as if they formed an unpaid account. She wrote that she and my father had sacrificed for decades and deserved to enjoy the cottage. I did not argue point by point. That was the trap I had lived inside for years. My mother would create a list of everything she had ever done, and I would respond by proving my gratitude through new labor. Instead, I sent one sentence. Raising me did not purchase permanent access to property Evelyn legally left to me. She called me ungrateful. I did not reply. The deadline for removing belongings approached. Because I could not safely carry boxes, I established scheduled access periods and required everyone to confirm in writing. Caleb offered to supervise, so I would not need to remain at the cottage while they packed. I hesitated. "You've already done enough," I said. "So have you." The difference was that Caleb's words did not mean I should continue doing everything. They meant I was allowed to stop. My parents removed their belongings first. My father sent photographs of every minor mark he claimed had reduced the cottage's value, despite having no financial interest in the sale. He also complained that moving his fishing equipment worsened his back pain. Brooke arrived later and took more than the clothing stored in her room. Caleb noticed her attempting to remove several household items that belonged with the property. When he stopped her, she accused him of choosing money over family. He told her, "Lena is the only person here who hasn't asked me to destroy myself for her." Brooke left without answering. That evening, my mother called again. Her tone was softer, which once would have made me surrender immediately. "We are all upset," she said. "Maybe everyone reacted poorly." It was the closest she had come to acknowledging the refusal. I waited. "But selling the cottage is extreme," she continued. "If you cancel it, we can discuss how to move forward." The apology she wanted credit for had never arrived. She was offering peace only if I restored what she was losing. "Would you help with the surgery?" I asked. "That isn't the point anymore." "It was always the point." "You have access to more than enough money now." "Because I solved the problem at everyone else's expense." "No, Mom, I stopped solving everyone else's problems at mine." She accused me of twisting the situation and ended the call. Afterward, guilt arrived so strongly that I almost called the realtor. I pictured empty family holidays and my father forced to sell the boat. I imagined Brooke telling relatives that I had betrayed them over money. My mother's voice repeated the word ungrateful until it sounded like a verdict. Then my injured ankle shifted inside the brace. Pain cut through the guilt. I remembered the surgeon's warning. I remembered the folder being pushed back across the table. I remembered Brooke's laugh and Caleb's envelope. The sale remained in place. My family had spent years teaching me that responsibility meant accepting consequences. Now they would experience their own. The closing process moved quickly, but it did not feel quick to me. Each day consumed part of the medical window. The title office reconfirmed that the cottage was mortgage-free and legally mine. The buyers reviewed the updated disclosure about the dock. The realtor coordinated final documents and verified that the cash funds would be available at closing. Nothing dramatic went wrong. No hidden claimant appeared. My parents possessed no legal authority to interrupt the transaction. The anxiety came from ordinary administrative timing combined with the knowledge that my ankle could not wait indefinitely. I kept the surgical coordinator informed. She tentatively reserved the earliest available operating time after the expected closing, but she reminded me that the deposit had to clear before the procedure could be finalized. Meanwhile, my business continued slowing. I could complete limited bookkeeping from my apartment, but pain medication made concentration difficult. Ordinary tasks took twice as long. Carrying food from the kitchen required planning. Showering became a calculated risk. The experience stripped away my belief that I could always manage alone. Caleb checked on me every day. He brought groceries, moved frequently used items within reach, and refused to discuss how he planned to earn. without his tools. Whenever I asked, he said, one problem at a time. He did not understand that his missing equipment had become one of my problems. Before closing, I made one final visit to the cottage. Caleb drove me and helped me reach the porch. The property looked unchanged, which made the decision feel unreal. The lake was calm. The damaged dock remained blocked off near the water. Inside, the rooms were emptier after my family removed their belongings. For the first time, the cottage felt like mine, not because everyone else was gone, but because I was finally deciding what happened to it. I moved slowly through the rooms and allowed the memories to come without turning them into commands. I remembered Evelyn sitting near the window. I remembered her thanking me for small acts my parents considered obligations. She had not left me a building I was required to preserve at any cost. She had left me a choice. I stood at the door with the old key in my hand. "Goodbye, Grandma," I whispered. I was not saying goodbye to her. I was saying goodbye to the belief that love had to remain attached to a location other people could exploit. On closing day, I signed the final documents and surrendered the cottage key. The transaction funded as promised. After fees and the tax reserve, approximately $213,000 remained under my control. I transferred the $4,200 deposit immediately. The surgical coordinator called less than an hour later. "We have your confirmation," she said. "Your procedure is scheduled." Relief passed through me so suddenly that I began crying before I could answer. The money had cleared. The cottage was gone. The surgery could proceed within the recommended window, but paying for treatment did not guarantee the outcome. I had protected my opportunity to recover. Now I had to discover whether I had acted soon enough. Caleb drove me to the hospital before sunrise. He tried to fill the silence by complaining about the terrible coffee available near the entrance, but I could hear the strain beneath his humor. My parents knew the date of the surgery. I had sent one factual message so no one could later claim I had concealed it. Neither of them came. My father replied with, "Hope it goes well." My mother did not answer until after I had checked in. "We're still hurt, but we don't wish you harm." Even then, her concern arrived wrapped around her own grievance. Brooke sent nothing. Caleb stayed beside me until the staff prepared to take me into the operating area. "You saved this," I told him, touching the envelope containing the remaining portion of his $650. "You sold the cottage. I might not have done it if you hadn't shown me what real help looked like." He lowered his eyes. "I wish I could have done more." "You did too much." He looked ready to argue, but a nurse arrived. As I was taken away, I watched Caleb remain in the hallway until the doors closed between us. The procedure repaired the fracture and stabilized the damaged joint. The surgeon also relieved the compression affecting the nerve. When I woke, my leg felt heavy, distant, and painful despite the medication. The first question I asked was whether the repair had gone as planned. The surgeon said the joint was stable and the timing had given the nerve the best available chance to recover. It was good news. It was not a promise. For several weeks, I remained unable to place normal weight on the leg. Swelling made the skin feel too tight. Sleep came in short intervals. Every movement required effort. Caleb brought meals and helped arrange transportation to follow up appointments. He never behaved as though his support entitled him to control my decisions. That difference mattered. My parents had considered ordinary parental care an investment that purchased future obedience. Caleb helped because I needed help, then returned the choice to me. At my first major rehabilitation appointment, the therapist asked me to attempt movements that appeared almost insignificant. Lifting the front of my foot by a fraction of an inch felt impossible. The nerve responded slowly, and my muscles had weakened. I left exhausted. For one frightening period, I became convinced that I had sold the cottage and fractured my family, only to limp anyway. The surgeon had warned me that recovery would not be immediate, but fear does not respect medical explanations. Every difficult step felt like evidence that I had acted too late. Caleb refused to offer false reassurance. "You paid for the best chance," he said. "Now give the chance time to work." So I did. I followed the rehabilitation plan. I gradually resumed bookkeeping from home. I built my workday around appointments and rest instead of pretending my body had no limits. That was a new form of responsibility for me. It did not look heroic. It looked like stopping when the pain increased, asking for transportation, and admitting when I could not complete something alone. Several weeks after surgery, I managed the first controlled movement that had previously failed. The therapist noticed before I did. "There," she said, "do it again." The second attempt was smaller, but it happened. That movement did not mean I would recover perfectly. It meant the nerve was responding. I cried in the rehabilitation room, not because everything was fixed, but because my future no longer felt closed. That evening, I asked Caleb again about his work. He admitted he had been accepting whatever tasks he could perform with borrowed equipment or as an extra set of hands. His income had become even less predictable. He tried to dismiss it. "I'll rebuild." I knew he would. I also knew he should never have been forced to rebuild from nothing because he loved me. After he left, I unfolded the equipment receipt he had given me. Then I called the used equipment dealer. I asked which tools had already been resold and which remained available. Caleb knew nothing about that conversation. I intended to keep it that way until I could finish what I had started. Recovery gave me long periods in which I could no longer outrun my own thoughts. I had assumed selling the cottage would make me feel victorious once surgery was secured. It did not. Some days I felt relieved. Other days, grief arrived without warning. A photograph of a lake could make me miss Evelyn so sharply that I questioned everything. But I never missed the system that had formed around her property. Without the cottage, my mother had fewer reasons to call. Brooke no longer sent me lists of supplies to purchase before her visits. My father stopped asking about dock repairs because the dock belonged to someone else. The silence exposed how much of our communication had centered upon what I could provide. My mother eventually sent what she described as an apology. "I am sorry the conversation became hurtful, but you must understand how shocking your decision was for us." There was no acknowledgement of the surgery refusal, her statement about the limp, or the years of unequal responsibility. She regretted the conflict, not her choice. I answered, "I am willing to discuss a relationship after there is direct accountability for what was said and done. I am not willing to debate the sale." She replied that I was setting impossible conditions. I stopped responding. My father called several weeks later. He did not begin with my rehabilitation. He began with the boat. The nearest suitable marina required seasonal fees, insurance documentation, and separate winter storage. The total cost erased much of the savings he expected from using my dock. "You could have warned us before we bought it," he said. "I told you the dock needed work. I never guaranteed permanent access. We bought it because the cottage was available. You bought it because you assumed my property would remain available regardless of how you treated me." He became quiet. Then he asked, "How is the leg?" The question arrived late, but I answered honestly. I explained that the nerve was responding and that I had begun placing limited weight under supervision. "I'm glad," he said. For a moment, I heard genuine relief. Then he added, "Maybe once this settles, we can all put it behind us." Putting it behind us meant returning to the same arrangement without examining it. I can't do that. Families forgive. Forgiveness does not restore unlimited access. He sighed. "You sound like your mother." "No, Mom uses responsibility to control other people. I'm finally taking responsibility for what I allow." That ended the conversation. A few months later, Martin sold the boat. Marina fees, storage expenses, and financing had transformed the purchase from a reward into a burden. He accepted a modest loss. I did not celebrate. The sale was not revenge. It was the predictable result of buying a luxury asset based upon permanent free use of property he did not own. Brooke remained openly angry. She accused me of dividing the family and refused to acknowledge her laughter. When she later asked whether I could review a complicated billing issue for her, I declined. She reacted as though my refusal confirmed every accusation she had made. It did not occur to her that she was asking for free help from the sister whose medical emergency she had mocked. I established new rules. I no longer managed my parents' financial paperwork without a formal agreement. I stopped paying incidental family costs. I shared medical information only with people who used it to support me rather than judge me. Any discussion involving money or property remained in writing. The boundaries felt harsh at first because I had spent years confusing accessibility with love. Then I noticed something important. The people who respected me did not object to reasonable boundaries. Caleb never demanded access to the sale proceeds. He never asked me to replace his tools. He did not even ask how much money remained after treatment. He continued checking on my recovery while trying to restore his own work. That made what I planned for him feel more important. Meanwhile, rehabilitation continued. I progressed from complete protection to assisted weight-bearing, then to carefully controlled steps. My gait was uneven at first. Stiffness remained, especially after long periods of sitting, and the surgical scar reminded me that recovery was not erasure, but the pronounced, permanent limp I had feared did not develop. The day I crossed my apartment without crutches, I stood beside the wall afterward and cried. Not because the distance was impressive, because my mother had treated that ability as something I should lose for educational purposes. I had saved it by rejecting her lesson. Responsibility was not accepting preventable damage while others protected their comfort. Responsibility was choosing a future and accepting that some relationships might not survive the choice. The equipment dealer still had several of Caleb's major tools when I called after surgery. I explained that they had been sold during a medical emergency and asked whether I could repurchase them. Some smaller items had already been transferred, but the principal saws, nailers, router, and sanders remained in inventory. I bought them back after the cottage funds cleared. For the equipment that could not be recovered, I purchased comparable replacements. Then I placed everything in secure storage. I did not tell Caleb. Returning the tools immediately would have solved only part of the problem. He also needed work that paid fairly enough to rebuild his business without depending upon unpredictable favors. During recovery, I began searching for a modest, single-level home. I did not want luxury. I wanted stability. The property I eventually chose needed repairs, but the basic layout suited the future I was building. It had no internal staircase, enough space for a home office, and room for accessibility improvements that would make recovery safer. I purchased it without involving my parents. They learned only that I had moved after the transaction was complete. Before any renovation began, I asked Caleb to meet me at the property. He arrived, expecting me to request informal advice. He walked through the entrance, studied the worn interior, and immediately began identifying practical improvements. "You'll need a stronger handrail here," he said. "The doorway near the bedroom should be widened. The flooring transition is a problem if your ankle catches." He was still talking when I led him toward the garage. The recovered tools were arranged inside: his saws, his nailers, his router and sanders. Replacement cases stood beside the equipment that could not be retrieved. Caleb stopped in the doorway. For several seconds, he said nothing. Then he walked toward the workbench and touched one of the cases as though he did not trust what he was seeing. "How?" "I kept the receipt." He looked back at me. "You bought them?" "I recovered everything the dealer still had and replaced the rest." "You shouldn't have done this. You sold them for my surgery." "That was my decision. And this is mine." His face tightened. "I didn't give you that money so you would owe me." "I know. Then why?" "Because I'm not Mom." The words came out more sharply than I intended, but they were true. "I am not going to turn your love into a permanent financial injury," I continued. "You helped me because you wanted me to have a future. I want you to have one too." He looked away and wiped his face with the back of his hand. I let the silence remain. His sacrifice deserved more than a cheerful thank you. It deserved recognition of what it had cost. "There's something else," I said. I handed him a folder. His expression changed when he opened it. Inside was a renovation scope, budget, and formal contract based upon market rates. The work included accessibility improvements, flooring repairs, trim, door adjustments, and the handrail he had already noticed. Caleb shook his head. I can do it for less. No, Lena, you are not donating labor. You are a skilled contractor, and I am hiring you. You already replaced the tools. That restores what you lost. The contract pays you for what you do next. He read the figures again. This is real. It becomes real when you sign it. His business would not become an overnight success. One contract could not guarantee permanent stability, but it gave him equipment, legitimate income, and completed work he could show future clients. The renovation later produced referrals because people saw the quality of what he built. More importantly, it changed something inside him. Our parents had treated Caleb as irresponsible for years. He began believing that sacrifice was the only way to prove he could be trusted. I wanted him to understand what I had been forced to learn. Love should not require either person to destroy their own future. Caleb signed the contract. Then he picked up the same tool case he had sold for me. What do you want me to start with? He asked. I pointed toward the entrance. The handrail. He smiled through the emotion he was still trying to hide. I can do that. The $650 had never been enough to pay for my surgery, but it had given me something more important than money. It showed me which relationships deserved to survive the crisis. My recovery lasted months. Progress arrived slowly enough that I learned to respect it. Eventually, I could walk independently without the pronounced permanent limp the surgeon had feared. Minor stiffness remained, especially during cold weather or after long days. The scar along my ankle did not disappear. I was grateful for both. They reminded me that saving myself had not produced a perfect life. It had produced a real one. The new house became part of that reality. Caleb completed the accessibility work carefully and within the contract. The widened doorway made movement easier. The corrected flooring removed unnecessary hazards. The handrail near the entrance provided support without restricting me. That handrail came to represent everything my family had misunderstood. Healthy support did not make someone weak. It allowed them to move forward safely. I rebuilt my business gradually and maintained a genuine medical reserve. I stopped allowing every family inconvenience to become my emergency. Caleb became my emergency contact. My parents remained alive and reachable, but they were no longer the people entrusted with decisions about my well-being. Contact with my father became polite and infrequent. He expressed regret occasionally, but he never fully confronted how his silence supported my mother's cruelty. Diane continued describing the cottage sale as something I had done to the family. Until she could discuss what the family had done to me without adding excuses, our relationship remained distant. Brooke and I stayed estranged. I mourned those relationships, but I stopped confusing mourning with evidence that my boundaries were wrong. One afternoon, after Caleb finished the last section of trim, I stood at the entrance with my new house key in my hand. The old cottage key had represented an inheritance I believed I was obligated to preserve for everyone else. This key represented ownership without exploitation. Caleb's restored tools were active behind me. The sound of his work moved through a home where his skill was respected and paid fairly. I placed one hand on the rail he had built and stepped through the doorway. Then I released it. My ankle remained upright, my head remained high, and I walked into my own home without waiting for anyone's permission. My mother had believed a limp would teach me responsibility. She was wrong. What taught me responsibility was realizing that my body, my property, and my future were not resources my family could consume. The cottage was gone. The boat was gone. The family structure I had spent years protecting was gone too. But my ability to walk remained. My brother's livelihood remained. And for the first time in my life, the support around me did not require me to surrender myself.